I believe it's time. Good afternoon again. And we continue with this narrative of the history of Western civilization, certainly in terms of the ancient world, which we've been studying up to now. The Roman Empire is the culmination of the ancient period. It sees the unification of the whole of the Middle East and the Mediterranean to a single political unit, culminating that whole succession of empires that began with Sumeria. Before I start, I want to say two things. Well, I want to deal with a review question, but I also want to note some people have completed their tests. They want to upload their test or their essay. The way to do that is to go to UmLearn assessment in this course. UmLearn assessments, assignments, and you will see the two assignments, the test and the first essay. And I've checked with IT, I've cleared this with IT, and you should see this when you you investigate, and you can upload from there, as to say, assessments, assignment, you see the test and you see the exam file, and you upload it to that file. As I say, I've cleared this with IT, so I think it's all right. If it isn't, we'll have to do something about it. Are there any questions? Okay. I want to review, do a review question, and this is the review question that deals with, this is question 14. It deals with the comparison of Athens and Sparta. And begin now with the fact that Athens evolved from being an aristocratic state, a state dominated by its aristocracy, as a result of class warfare. In the 6th century, the period of the tyrants developed, but at the end of the day, in the 5th century, at the end of the 6th, the beginning of the 5th century, Athens became a democracy. The last of the tyrants was chased out. Now, this is a kind of model, because the most advanced, or most of the most advanced city-states followed the Athenian model. Democracy spread to many city-states in the 5th century. However, Sparta clung on and resisted this whole process, and the warrior aristocracy continued to, just as in the 8th century, right into the period of classical Greece, the Spartans determinedly clung to their aristocratic constitution, and therefore failed to become a democracy. So, of course, as time wore on, Sparta, great land power, great warriors, competition with Athens, and even at the time, the comparisons were made between the way of life of these two city-states. So you want a comparison. You want to recapitulate what I've just said, and then you want to contrast the fact that Athens was ruled by its democratic or popular assembly, whereas the Spartans had an assembly which was restricted to only 5,000 warriors, aristocrats. Secondly, whereas in Athens and states like Athens, slavery was very important. In Sparta, the underclass remained as peasants, but they were serfs. They could not leave the land. They were physically controlled by this warrior Spartan aristocracy. A slave can be bought and sold, but these peasants were tied to the land, okay? Thirdly, in Athens, you have merchants, you have trade, you have money. In Sparta, you have none of this. It's strictly agricultural, and the Spartans want to keep it that way. Fourthly, the individualism, personal independence, and creativity came to be valued in Athens, whereas the Spartan elite believed in the group. It tended to suspect people who were too individualistic. And the Spartans lived in communal dormitories and ate in communal kitchens. As a result of all of this, the Athenians, the Athens became a great trading city with many foreigners and contacts everywhere. The Spartans preferred to be isolated. They didn't want any strangers in their midst. And they were what we call provincial in their outlook. They were provincial rather than cosmopolitan. The Athenians, of course, they respected reason, logic, philosophy. The Spartans, they, again, were very suspicious of this intellectuality, and they stressed physical prowess, strength, warlike technique. This is what they liked. The last point, the Athenian attitude tended to be critical towards all things. They were interested in how everything worked and what was behind everything, whereas the Spartans were conformists and really didn't question the way the world was or authority. Any questions? Okay, let's go back to the narrative of the history of Rome. And as I explained last time, the Romans had overthrown their king. They very much valued their republic, this conservative republic dominated by the Senate. There was a lot of class war. And the class war, land shortage and class war engendered imperialism, as I explained. Well, by the end of the 4th century, the Romans had conquered Italy. All of Italy fell into their hands. The last people were the Samnites, who dominated this region, and they were conquered at the end of the 4th century. So the whole of the Italian peninsula was controlled by Rome. There followed almost immediately the Punic Wars. The famous Punic, which means Phoenician or Carthaginian Wars. You can see there were 3 wars. Basically, war went on for over a century between these 2 powers. And I did show you this image of what was entailed, because you can see in purple, this is the Carthaginian Empire, which includes allies in Corsica and Sardinia and Sicily. So that in a way they surround the Italian peninsula. They hem it in. And of course the Carthaginians they were merchants. They They were sailors, and the Romans were not. And so in the first war, 264 to 41, at first the Romans had a bad time of it because they were trying to fight at sea, but they didn't know how. And it took them years to develop an effective navy, which they did. And they were able to conquer the so-called Italian islands. There are three great Italian islands: Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica. And these were taken in the first Punic or Carthaginian War. Now, the Second War, 218 to 201, which was the most terrible one, truly terrible conflict. It lasted for 17 years, and it began because the Carthaginians were basically trying to expand in Spain. They already had bases in Spain, but they wanted to go further, and that the Romans considered to be a threat, that it was a flanking operation, that they could flank the Italian peninsula. And so war broke out, and the person who emerged as the dominant figure in the war was Hannibal. Just 1 second. For some reason, it's bringing up the wrong thing. I'll give it one more shot. Okay, Hannibal. It was on the screen. The name was on the screen before. Damn. Anyway, Hannibal. And we saw at the end of the last lecture that Hannibal, in the spectacular move, sure enough, he marched army from southern Spain through southern France, led by war elephants, across the Alps, and took the Romans by surprise. And he slaughtered them in two great battles in northern Italy. The Romans really, after losing these two great battles, they were directly threatened by Hannibal's march on Rome. And furthermore, southern Italy rebelled against their Roman masters. So they were, Rome was terrified that this would be the end, really, for them, because the Carthaginians would conquer. So in this extremity, in this extreme situation, one of their generals, his name was Fabius, 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 he said, we cannot fight the Carthaginians are too strong. We cannot fight Hannibal. So what we have to do is basically use delaying tactics. We can harass the Carthaginian army, but we can't confront them directly. They'll beat us. So we have to use what we call sort of delaying tactics. And we have to destroy all food supplies, all shelter in the path of Hannibal's army. So these kinds of tactics are called a Fabian strategy, a Fabian strategy. That is to say, wearing out the enemy. And I'm stressing this. This actually did succeed. Ultimately, the Romans were able to wear out Hannibal, and since they denied him supplies, his army eventually it became weaker and weaker. Of course, this policy was extremely expensive for the Romans because basically all of most of Italy was ravaged, because the Romans, not only were the Carthaginians ravaging Italy, so were the Romans. So we call this Fabian tactics. Now, part of the reason I'm harping on this is that in the late 19th century, in England, a group of intellectuals, including people like George Bernard Shaw, the famous playwright, formed what they called the Fabian Society. And these people were not warmongers. No, they were early socialists in England. And they called themselves the Fabian Society because they said, well, we don't believe in revolution. We believe in evolution. We believe we can wear out the capitalists by gradually eroding their power. And these they called Fabian tactics, and they called their society the Fabian Society. And it's important in terms of history, but even literature, because a lot of the people who went into this were intellectuals and writers and so on. So this is a kind of something you need to know in terms of your overall background. Now, while the Romans were pursuing this policy, they were also able to launch attacks on Hannibal's forces in Spain. Of course, this used up most of the Romans' resources, but they formed an invasion force, and they were able to attack successfully the Carthaginians in Spain. And indeed, in 209, they were able to seize the key Carthaginian city of Carthage. New Carthage. Carthage is here. Right here is a city called New Carthage, or today in Spanish, it's called Cartagena, a very pleasant beach town. Cartagena was taken by the Romans. And then, so this was a first victory, but then Hannibal, he sent messages to Carthage and said, listen, unless you send reinforcements to me, I cannot continue the campaign. So the Carthaginians dispatched a great fleet to try and relieve Hannibal in Italy. And this failed because the Roman navy was able to defeat the Carthaginian navy. This is in 207. And so this was a true setback. So the Romans had triumphed in Spain, and they had rebuffed this Carthaginian relief force. And for good measure now, they actually invaded Africa. They invaded Carthaginian territory. And Hannibal, at this point, and whatever was left of his army, fled Italy to try and save Carthage. But the Carthaginians met ultimate defeat at Zama, Z-A-M-A, Zama, 202, Zama, the Battle of Zama. Hannibal is defeated, and he is forced into exile. They didn't kill him. He was too great a general, and so they forced him into exile, but they imposed a very harsh peace on the Carthaginians. It looked like now Rome had triumphed, but Carthage was still there, and Roman politicians kept saying, we have to finish the job. We have to basically kill off the Carthaginian threat for once and for all. And so a final war against Carthage in 149, 146, 149 to 146, Carthage is completely destroyed by the Romans. They even saw, if you could believe it, they salt the land. They salt the land so it can't grow crops. And the Carthaginians, the few that are left, are forced to flee. And now, with this victory, Rome basically takes control of the whole of the Western Mediterranean. It is now a Roman lake. It's controlled by Rome. North Africa, Spain, southern France, or as it's called, Gaul, and Italy is now an empire. And indeed, these wars basically, the Romans began these wars saying, oh, we're defending ourselves. But by the end of this, they said, you know, empire is a pretty good thing. And so why was that? Because there were tens, hundreds of thousands of slaves. They enslaved hundreds of thousands of people. They got all sorts of gold. They collected all the gold from all the newly conquered territories, including the gold mines in Spain. And the Romans concluded that making war in this way, imperialism, plundering and enslaving, was rewarding. So what starts as a defensive wars turns into a war for empire. And indeed, we see that they already are engaged in expansion. While the last Punic War is going on, Macedon, the king of Greece, Macedon, remember the Hellenistic period, the kingdom of Macedon ruled over Greece. Well, in 148, 149, when the last war broke out, the king of Macedon had allied with the Carthaginians. So as a result of the war, the Romans invaded Macedon and Greece and basically reduced it to a Roman province. This whole area, Macedon and Greece, the Balkans, it all became part of the Roman Empire. And they went further. In 133, they took over Turkey, or Asia Minor. 133, it became a Roman province. And they began to make moves in the rest of the Middle East. For example, Judea, which at this time was ruled by an independent Jewish monarch, so-called, you don't have to know this, but it's the Hasmonean dynasty. The Romans forced the king of Judea to become a puppet of Rome. They said, well, you can keep your independence, so-called, but essentially you do what we say. And so Judea remained a Roman puppet state until almost to the time of Christ, when the Romans actually took over and imposed a governor by the name of Pontius Pilate. Some of you who have read the New Testament, he was the governor at the time of Christ. Well, the Romans got rid of the Jewish king and they imposed um, their own governor, and that area became a Roman province. And of course, this area here, North Africa, was also, following the last war, made into a Roman province. So what I'm saying is they basically set their course on empire, slaves, gold, pillage. This was the way. And I would say that certainly, first of all, that the British upper class carefully studied Roman history. The British were the great imperialists of modern history, and they modeled themselves on the Romans. And one could say as well, whatever they said, the Americans likewise. The Americans, of course, it is my view that it's hardly contestable. They have an empire. And first of all, their constitution is deeply influenced by the Roman Republican constitution. And secondly, empires are exploitative. Now, the Romans were after pillage, they were after land, they were after slaves. The Americans are after cheap labor and cheap resources and investment opportunities. It's different, but there's a certain parallel. And as you'll see, I'm going to sort of invoke that parallel as we move along. Now, what had happened basically is that the Romans were now taking over basically the whole of the Mediterranean and on into the Middle East. This was amazing because the reality was at this time, really, whatever the earlier struggle had been, the Senate of Rome, made up of 100 senators, these very rich landlords, controlled 50 million people. That's the bottom line here. The Senate of Rome controlled the destiny now, this is talking about the Roman Empire, open to exploitation by 100 senators. That's what's going on. And so an immense booty, as I say, land, slaves, precious metals, became available to the Roman elite, the senatorial politicians, but also the generals. And also sharing in this directly, the major part, were the merchant class. A relatively strong merchant class had emerged called equites or knights had emerged, and they too shared, although they were inferior to, obviously, the patricians, to the senators, to the landlords. These merchants did relatively well under these circumstances. So and certainly the Romans, especially at the beginning, showed the provinces no mercy whatsoever. They just ripped them off, exploited whatever they could get. They took out of these provinces. I would say that the common people of Rome, they benefited to a certain, there was a trickle down to the common people, to the people who lived in the towns, to the rural people. Some of this lucre, some of this wealth did trickle down to the common people. So, for example, if you served in the legions and the service was a long time, you would be given land in the conquered lands. You could become a colonist in the conquered lands. some of the booty, the generals, in order to win political influence, would distribute some of the lucre, some of the wealth, the gold, and so on, what have you, to their soldiers to gain their loyalty. And there would be the Roman politicians said, "Oh, we can keep your taxes low, or we won't tax you at all because we have all this. We're ripping off all these other people. They're paying the tribute, so you don't have to pay your taxes." So there were benefits even to the common folk as well, especially those who served in the armies. And more and more enlistment in the armies was attractive to the Romans, but also all the other people who lived in Italy, because what was going on simultaneously with its conquest overseas was, especially starting with the Second Punic War, there was so much destruction during this period. The soldiers had to serve in such long service. They would be away from their farms for years. And with the destruction, there would be huge numbers of destroyed farms. The peasants would lose their land. And so the only alternative was to join the army, join the legions. And so there was a constant influx of poor people. The towns were filled with poor people who had lost their farms. And so what they could do was basically join the army. This is a common thing. We see that poor people in Canada join the army, or in the United States. You can't do anything else, you join the army. Now, at the same time, another important development from the 2nd century is the fact that they conquered Greece, because Greece was the center, was considered to be the height of civilization. I have explained that earlier. Classical Greece, Hellenistic Greece, the Romans, who were rather provincial and crude, they now began to what we call Hellenize. They began to Hellenize themselves. They began to study Greek literature, Greek history, Greek poetry, Greek drama. Greeks opened up academies where they taught Greek philosophy. The architecture of the Romans based itself on Greek models. They had games and public baths and gymnasiums, all on the model of the old Greek city-states. This was considered, the Greeks were considered the most civilized even by the Romans, and they began to sort of become Hellenized. Of course, they kept their language, Latin, but everything was translated from the Greek. Greek philosophers and teachers, artists made their way to Italy, and within about a generation, the Roman elite, I'm not talking about the common people, they're left out, of course. The elites became Hellenized. You couldn't operate in the Roman Empire without an education in the Greek way. And so this began to happen from that point on. And furthermore, as time wore on, the Romans began to sort of try to put an ideological varnish on their conquests. They tried to justify in more lofty terms what they were doing, that is to say, conquests for the purpose of exploitation. So they said that with us, once we're finished conquering, we are imposing the Roman peace. There will be no more war, because we rule. Rome rules, therefore the Roman peace and Roman law is imposed. Law is a instrument of upper classes. The Roman law, the Roman peace, particularly the phrase Pax Romana, the Roman peace, is important to remember. This is what they said they were doing. They were bringing peace. Well, the reality was the conquests were terrible, and moreover, within Rome, the social conflicts did not go away. They did not subside. In fact, they got worse. And from the 2nd century onwards, Rome, we're now talking about the late Republic, was racked by a whole series of deep social conflicts, which ultimately destroyed the Roman Republic and led to the establishment of an emperor. This happened at the end of the 1st century BC, and this is what I propose to narrate from this point onwards. Well, the truth of the matter is that as a result of these conquests, the rich got richer in Rome. I've already indicated. It was the Senate, it was the top military commanders, it was the merchants. They were the main beneficiaries of these conquests, but also they benefited from the fact that most of the peasants within Rome, within the Italy, were losing their land, and especially the land in central Italy and southern Italy, Sicily, basically fell into the hands of the landlord class, the generals, the senators, the merchants. They took over the land, and the peasants completely lost their land in this region. Great estates owned by the people I've just indicated, the oligarchy, the rich, who dominated, of course, the politics. Great estates which were worked by slaves were the characteristic form of land exploitation from the period following the Punic Wars onwards. So there were great slave estates, while the peasantry fell into poverty, and many of them, just a second, yes, the dispossessed peasants had to move to the towns, especially Rome. And Rome became a vast city of over 1 million people. And most of these people were dispossessed peasants who had lost their land and could find no work because industry was backward. It's not like in modern times where there were jobs in factories or now in 7-Elevens. No, there was no work. So you get basically what's called the Roman mob. The Roman mob. That is to say, terribly impoverished people without work. And this becomes a political force in its own right because the state has to sort of take care of these people through the benefits of empire. Otherwise, they riot. Otherwise, they make trouble. And of course, the politicians, the senators above all, but others as well, they went around buying votes, buying influence with the people. And they did this in other cities in Italy and all, but mainly it was happening in Rome. The politics of the Roman Republic became increasingly driven by money and corruption. And it was based on this huge social inequality. Now, ladies and gentlemen, look at the United States of America. Look at it. The 1%. And they keep the forms of the Republic. It almost fell with Trump, but that's very important. It's the beginning. But they keep the forms of the republic, they embrace the forms of the republic, but the reality is growing social inequality and political corruption. And I would say that unless things change, I can't predict the future. I don't know what's going to. Unless things change, there will be change at the political level. Trump is only the beginning. Now, meanwhile, and this is so you have the Roman mob and so on, but the really important political change is what is happening to the army. This entirely victorious army, the Roman army, it's in order to run this empire, they need more and more people. They need more and more soldiers. And so what you see is increasingly what had been a citizen Roman army, an invincible infantry, legions based on these sturdy peasants of Italy. This is all vanishing. Of course, there are vestiges and so on, but it's basically vanishing. What is going on is that the army, for having been a citizen army, you couldn't be a citizen without serving in the army, now becomes a professional army made up essentially of mercenaries. So to begin with, there weren't enough soldiers. Now, it was a rule up to this point, up to the beginning of the end of the 2nd century, that in order to serve in the army, you needed a little farm, you needed some property. Well, most of the peasants had lost their property. So in 107, the Senate passed a new law saying that you didn't need to have any property in order to serve in the army. And this became a sort of an outlet for people who were part of this poor, unemployed mass. And the Romans said, indeed, not only are we doing this for citizens of Rome, but even for other Italians. You can join the Roman legions and you will become a citizen after your 16 years of service. Now, so this is an important change, but what's really critical from a political point of view is the growing split between the army and the political constitution, between the state, the Senate, the Popular Assembly, the tribunes, the councils, and the army. The army is developing an independent politics, is what I'm saying, separate from that of the state structure. And it gradually becomes a political force in its own right, which is used to overthrow the Roman Republic. This is what we're describing. Now, as we see, most of those who are now serving in the legions were poor, dispossessed peasants. Their fathers had been peasants. They were no longer such. They didn't feel any stake in the Roman Republic. What's that all about? They had no interest in the politics of the Roman Republic. They had lost interest in the Republic. The Republic was corrupt. It was a joke. Again, I point to the analogy with the United States. Many people down there feel that the politics, it's all in the hands of the rich and these corrupt politicians. That's pretty much the sentiment that was felt in Rome at the time. So where the conscripts, the people who joined the army, they looked to their generals. They began to look to their generals, their officers, who provided for them, distributed the benefits of, they distributed land when they conquered land. They gave out some of the gold and silver, all kinds of favor. There was all kinds of private plunder that could be taken advantage of. And also you see during this period that increasing the soldiers, sort of like motorcycle gangs, if you like, they develop a certain spirit, a certain, what's called in military terms, esprit de corps, a spirit. We don't give a damn about this. We just care about and are loyal to our units and our generals, and to hell with the rest of the world. That's increasing it. Whatever the general says, we will follow him. And they could give a fig about the civilian politicians. They don't care. However, there was a last attempt at saving the republic, I would say, and this came about. It's an interesting story. It should be told. Toward in the last 50 years before, after the Punic War, there arose in Rome two brothers who their names were Gracchus. They came from a family known as Gracchus, 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 the family Gracchus, Gracchus, Gracchus. The names of these Gracchi brothers, Gracchi is the plural for Gracchus, the Gracchi brothers, Gracchi, Gracchi brothers. Their names were Gaius and Tiberius. And they were elected by the popular assembly, still existed, as tribunes successively. And when they were tribunes, the tribunes, remember, were part of the sort of popular element of the Constitution. The Senate and the councils are basically controlled by the aristocrats, but the popular assembly and the tribunes were the people's voice. Well, the Gracchis began to demand immediate land reform. Give the land, we need an agrarian form which gives the land back to the peasants. We need to reduce the power of the Senate and give more power to the popular assembly. We need to admit the allies of Rome, those who live outside the boundaries, the allies in the north and in the south, the cities who have no political rights to speak of. They should become citizens of the Roman state. And also the merchants should be given, as against the aristocrats, should be given more power. That was their program. So reduce the Senate, agrarian reform, reduce the power of the Senate, and citizenship to the allies, and more power to the merchants. Well, the senators and the councils, the conservatives, said, nothing doing. This is against our Constitution. And the Gracchi said, to hell with that. We're not going to be bound by what the Constitution says. We're going to act in the name of the people. So they were both assassinated successively. Assassins hired by the Senate basically assassinated the Gracchi brothers. And that was the last attempt, really, to restore the old days. And it's also the last attempt on the part of the people to mount any kind of response to the aristocrats. From here on in, the people have no voice whatsoever. This class war is won by the aristocracy, and what we see now is a struggle for power between the politicians who control the Senate and the great generals. They divide into factions and they fight for power. And at the end of the day, the Roman Republic, it falls. And a new period where there is an emperor begins after 31 BC. And I'll describe that in the next class. onward, avanti.